Cyberspace in space research.
Out of cyberspace.
This is what it is called in the original, and this is the name or the title of an article of Bruce Sterling, well-known cyberpunk and journalist. It was written 1990, 25 years ago, and it is very interesting in terms of how predictive it was. You may wonder whether there's any value in science fiction. So, 25 years ago, Mr. Sterling was describing how NASA of the United States aims at something else as scientific research. He was describing it as a political animal who does political PR in its war with the Soviet Union, and all these stories about missions to Mars or the Moon is a kind of very expensive show that has very low value in terms of science. So when the Cold War ended, NASA lost its purpose because there was no enemy in sight. Still, they were making some launches, and Sterling was predicting the closure of space shuttle program and some others, and he was right. But he also gave a positive forecast for space research, because as he referred to other industries like defense, there are some other technologies which are developing, like spy satellites, global positioning, surveillance, and robotics. If we put it all together, we can talk about something you can call cyberspace, which enables anyone who is down there on Earth do space research without all that bureaucracy and the middlemen and NASA. So in his vision, there would be a great number of probes all over the solar system, inexpensive robots, easily replaceable, unlike the Apollo spacecraft that can crash and disappear. And based on those probes, you can do research even you are sitting in your home chair. We know that this is happening already because there are people who are discovering comets or exoplanets by just looking at space photographs. Maybe they will even get access to some devices on Mars. And this will be a real case of research rather than PR or wars that are waged. From the security point of view, we see some negative side to that scenario, because when outer space becomes accessible to hackers, they can capture a space station or signals or whatever else. We can guess what it can cause, because of course any critical structures can be cracked. The same can happen to space equipment. Experts say that we're not there yet, because space equipment is unique, very different from what we have in industrial management systems. Like Siemens may have a single controller for thousands of enterprises. So if you found the controller, you found vulnerability there, you can go and crash enterprises all over the world, including the power stations. The situation with outer space is more promising, because for each device there are many unique things like software, but still there are some alarm signals when from time to time something happens with a probe or spacecraft or space station. So it may suggest that you can go against and break a space station without physically affecting it. You can do it remotely. And also this space transportation market is very competitive, and many companies are trying to capture the niche that NASA abandoned. They are offering their spacecraft. And interestingly, most of the companies that are trying to capture that market now are being financed by former IT guys, or maybe current IT guys like Elon Musk, who founder of PayPal, Balance from Amazon. Microsoft has its own space program. Google as well. No, they have a tender. They suggested, they offered people to participate in a tender to come up with the best and quickest moon mower. So maybe it's a good way to get rid of your competitors. Well, but we're not guessing here. It's rather, we're here to try to see what is happening with the outer space, especially as regards internet vulnerability. There are 3 presentations which are officially listed today. One of the presenters is not here yet, so we will announce him, but we will not wait for him. We will begin and hope he will get here later. So, we have Dmitry Pashkov with us. He will tell us about amateur radio space communication. Dmitry keeps amazing Russian internet users by harvesting data from space satellites. Dmitry captures the data, and I was told a story, maybe it's not true, but I was told he helped find one satellite that got lost, but he will tell you about this. And it appears that this can be done from your home. Next, Vitaly Yegorov will give us some information about space, how you can do space research through internet. Vitaly, are you representative of Daure Space? Yes, I'm employed as specialist of the company. He's known for having found the Russian station Mars 3 by looking at photographs made by American probes, and he did this while sitting at home. This is exactly a case when outer cyberspace works. And finally, Alexander Lin, who will join us later, promised us to tell us about such promising things as world space research. He's co-founder of Lead Industrial, which is part of the Skolkovo cluster. So he's really the one who knows everything about the modern research, especially the space rocket transport. Okay, Vitaly will be the first because his presentation got loaded first. Maybe this is the sign from above. I would rather do it while standing. Apart from being employee of Daure Aerospace, I'm also a blogger. I write for Vkontakte, and my nickname is Green Code. My mission is to explain to everyone that space is not something that is far away, because modern communication technologies bring it closer to us And more than that, everyone can participate in research studying Mars and the whole universe. There are some ways which any internet user can apply to contribute to space research in some way, starting from very simple things like downloading software, and all the way to the most difficult things like earning millions of dollars and investing them into your own space company. There are lots of opportunities. You know, there's a project which is called Universe, and it offers a number of ways how an average internet user who can, with a computer and internet connection, can help scientists in research, starting from galaxies all the way to moon craters and Mars. Different kinds of research, like astrophysics, require a lot of manual work, which is not yet subject to automation. No software can do that yet. So scientists do need help from people. One example with Mars, this is closer to my heart. What people do there is looking at photographs of polar and subpolar areas of Mars. They were examining things which look like remnants of craters or weather conditions. What they look at is just dots and blots on the surface, and they help scientists monitor the direction of winds. And there are many shots that were made, and looking at them one after another, you can help scientists build a model for the movement of sand on the surface of Mars and make conclusions about prevailing winds. This is not what scientists could do themselves. Just physically impossible. The same with galaxies. Astronomical devices have made so many shots of sky with very high definition. It's not possible for any number of for anyone to physically browse all that. There are many galaxies which nobody even looked at yet. So you or anyone else can view a snapshot of a galaxy which nobody else saw before, and then place it within one or another category. Well, in another project which is almost complete now, and we're just showing how internet-based volunteers can help in real and serious research. Back in the year 2000, NASA implemented its Stardust project, when a spacecraft flew through the solar system and collected dust, space dust, which it came across all the way. And then it returned to Earth and brought the dust back. And the capsule that was used to collect the dust particles, the capsule that brought the particles of dust throughout the flight, it had the form of air gel, and they were sliced into thousands of samples. And then it took a lot of manual work to view them. 700,000 plates or samples were viewed, and 780 particles were found to be of not of origin which is outside the solar system. So the particles came from other stars. So this is research that is already completed. we were involved in the Mars 3 story. The only thing we knew about it is that it got to the surface of Mars, and then it unfolded its antennas, its aerials, and nobody knew anything else apart from the location where it landed. And this is something that we can see from Google Maps. The white rectangle is something that the satellite photographed with high definition.
On the right, we see this stripe with lines. This is a satellite that was split into 25 fragments and covered the territory ranging from 6 to 20 square kilometers. So, this kind of shot in high definition, we had to look through it to find the object, the size of which is 1 meter, 1.5 to 1.5 meters. We had about 20 people looking for the object, and we spent more time to prove that this was it, actually. So the shot on the right, this is it, this little spot in the down right corner, that's the Soviet station, and we spent a lot of time and effort to prove that this was it. However, NASA agreed with us, and they indicated it. Next, we had the following searching stage. We were looking for Mars 6 because it was much more complex. If with Mars 3 we had to look through one stripe, then with Mars 6 we had 10 of them, and they were much bigger, and overall, so far, everything that we had, we looked through it, but we haven't found it, so we truly hope that NASA will be able to make several more shots, and we'll be able to continue our searches. And if you want to take part, just to please yourself with the idea of space research, but not do anything for that. You can just download the specific piece of software and use it. Use the City Home project for some distributed calculations. You can provide the computation power of your home machine. You can even hook in your PlayStation, so it works when you don't play. It works to analyze the data that would help, at least, searching for interstellar intelligence. And so this kind of distributed calculations which you can contribute to, but you don't need to do anything here. Just you upload the software, download the software, you launch it, and that's it. As one of my friends said, the computer starts working as a good heater, and heats your soul. The fact that you take part in this kind of research heats your soul, and the room heats from the computer. It's convenient in the winter. There's a more interesting project here. It's in development. Cyberspace. The idea here is to create the global network to register space rays. Space rays are the space particles that are rushing close to light speed. Those are the atoms of ferrum or things like that. So they get into the atmosphere of Earth and get split into other subatomic particles. So they're kind of the bunches of particles. They're being calculated by this kind of telescope with a sensor that intersects that kind of particles, and the telescope complex is like a huge field with the barrels covered with zinc. So these barrels detect these particles that fall on the surface of Earth, and stemming from the quantity of those particles, there is a calculation made on what actually arrived. So, based on that, this interstellar particles which reach the Earth are being detected. The idea of Cyberspace is to use the smartphone matrices as this kind of sensors. So you simply download the app, and this is it. Your smartphone just works. You don't need to do anything. It calculates the interstellar particles, doing the real astrophysics at the peak of it. Yeah, looks like space particles are in the works, huh? So at the peak of astrophysical research, where a lot of things should be done in the future. The smartphone becomes, in a way, kind of sensor for global hadron collider, which registers this kind of particles at their relative speeds. Another more complex participation option for you is the joint development of certain software. NASA regularly set up the hackathons where different developers take part in the development of a certain software, for example, for landing of a spaceship to an asteroid, or hooking up a different, connecting two different spaceships. So this kind of Russian example, like Thorium, this is Russian software. Which is developed by Russian developers in their free time. It's created to create the to emulate the effect of the heat in the spaceships. Crowdfunding, another thing that can be done. Where it's possible to pay for the creation of spaceships via crowdfunding. Of course, we're far from space shuttles, but still, the record number here is 1.5 million to build a space telescope created by Planetarium Resources. That is a record, but is really far ahead of everyone else, because in the case of Planetarium Resources, the Google founders actually and James Cameron were backing up this project, so their authority, of course, allows to invest into this kind of risky project. Yet, a lot of people supported them, and I believe they owe me even one photo for $200 that I sent them. They offered to create a telescope, and those who gave the money, exchange would get the photo with a set objective or the objective that they set. So I would ask for Mars, of course. Another option, it got only $106,000 in Kickstarter. The idea was to create the satellite on Arduino. So the guys were going to get 80, but they got in the end 106,000. They created two satellites to launch both of them. Satellites kind of performed pretty well because in a year or so after the launch, the satellite, the company got the new name and got the investment of $20 million to launch 20 satellites like this. So the satellites would actually do some commercial activities. In Russia, things are much more modest. There are a few examples, though, where I took part. As the blogger who helped to gather funds for the projects. So we crowdfunded the book on the research of Venus. We collected over 800,000 rubles. Last year, we had the initiator who decided to make the first Russian satellites, private satellite, kind of a public satellite. A person asked for 400,000 rubles. We collected that sum, and now we are in progress of a research project to launch the first piloted spacecraft to Mars and Venus. Of course, we're not gathering money for the ship. We're still gathering money to do the research, the mathematical calculation of the project, whether it's possible or not to fly there at all. But now we need 300,000 rubles. We got 256, and the work is still in progress. Well, and the best thing, and people in the news will tell you about it, is to create our own space company. Alexander Lean, when he comes, this is the way he followed. At first, didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars. That was the wrong thing to do.
общем, у наших инвесторов, точнее, у наших создателей космических компаний нет сотен миллионов
Of
долларов.
course, our investors, our space companies, managers, don't have millions of dollars to be on par with the American companies. However, here are a few examples. One of the creators of PayPal created the SpaceX company. It's pretty successful. The Amazon creator invested into Blue Origin. They're not flying to space yet. They are making suborbital touristic capsules, but they still have some military orders to build the engine, and in fact, they're building quite serious spacecrafts. And one of the Microsoft founders invest into Strata Launch. This is the ambitious project. It's hard to say if work or not, but the idea is to launch from the flying plane. So now they're busy with modeling two Boeing 747 to make it into one huge plane with two cabins, between which it would be possible to launch the rocket and launch it from the height of 15 kilometers. So there are lots of ways to express themselves here. It's not the only list of those companies and projects that experiment in the aerospace. Google has a project with the Mooncraft. They have the set of their own satellites. They bought the Skybox for $0.5 billion. So there are lots of ways to get into space for businesses. This is it. Please ask your questions. And everybody went to search for microphones. Can you please tell, you were telling about the problem of that there aren't so many scientists and it's necessary to process a lot of data. That's why people are invited to analyze the data. Well, there's a similar task that was solved by Google when they were using people to, so for example, if somebody authorizing the mail with the wrong login, they need to unsolve the part of the book. Maybe you should work with Mail.ru, for example. If the person puts in the wrong login, for example, you can ask the user to search for Mars 2 or Mars 3. Well, we had this kind of idea of creating web app for smartphones to search for the station. If we created this, of course, it will take us more time to create the app than actually search for Mars 6 because, well, we would not need millions of users to find it. Of course, searching for Mars 6, it took 200 people to find it, and we were able to cover the entire service at least 3 times. So that's why, and again, we didn't find it. So either Mars 6 is hidden very well, or we're looking in the wrong place. Anyway, we'll continue searching. So we didn't need to get any specific computation powers for that or crowdfunding for that. Thank you very much for your presentation. The question is the following. Probably you all know the company called Dauri Airspace, and they had a certain problem after some stuff happened in Crimea, or the hope of Russian space kind of cosmonauts has failed. Since I work for Dauri Airspace, we didn't kind of feel it, but the Crimea thing, and the company didn't shut down. We needed to change our strategy, though, because the strategy of the company was initially built on the fact of getting Western investments from the West. Of course, that all stopped after the Crimea. However, by the time where it was clear the company already accumulated certain competences, and we built 3 satellites which are up there. We also developed a few projects of the satellites of the next generation. So it was clear that the company is ready to work as a satellite producer. And in this case, we have certain perspectives, have the contracts, not only in Russia, there are requests from Indians, and this is a pretty big contract. We have joint venture with the Chinese. So we have the future, the way to go. It's just not in the area where we initially supposed it would be. However, we continue working, and I believe it will continue in a long perspective. Questions the following. You mentioned the journey to Mars. So how about bringing the people back from Mars? So it's not so trivial as far as I heard. On the one hand, nobody's going to fly, get the one-way ticket there. I'm not talking about Mars One here. Those guys not going to, they just want to. I also mentioned this project where there will be no landing, so this is going to be a heliocentric orbit of the where the spacecraft will travel. It just flies by Mars, by Venus first, then the trajectory is being correct, then it flies by Mars, and then goes back into the starting point to the Earth. So this kind of a interstellar, interplanetary piloting, this is the simplest and the most accessible thing to do at this kind of stage. Let's give the word to Dmitry now. Good afternoon. Now let's imagine that you don't have internet. It's just shut down. And talk about getting this signal from spacecraft directly. I represent the radio enthusiasts community, and we are developing the radio communication in space. I reassembled a couple of satellites myself, and now I'm even bored. And slowly I start to work in a commercial area. Of course, the key thing here is meteorological satellites, the weather information, the wood fire information. For example, you're going to go fishing somewhere. Okay, you check it out. Okay, the weather's going to be good. There's no fire. I can go there. Since my presentation is pretty lengthy, I will quickly go through the theory, and then I'll tell you about how my station works. The entire communication is based on the fact that Popov invented the radio. So it started with that. We'll quickly go through Popov because it's a huge presentation, not only for this audience. So after Popov invented the radio, there was a boom of radio enthusiasm. Everybody started building their own transmitters. Radio enthusiasts, the military, the broadcasting stations. It was all kind of so-so. The military were shutting down the radio enthusiasts were shutting down the military, so that's when they started to assign the frequencies, for example, and of course the prefixes, giving the prefixes as well. For example, Russia has the R prefixes. So here R will be Russian, and RU that be the Mordovia Republic in Russia, and so on. So these are the calls, the radio identifiers. There's different equipment to use for connection with the spacecraft. It can be either Russian or imported. Here are a few samples of the foreign equipment. As the SDR transmitters transceivers are becoming more widespread in the radio enthusiast area. It can be connected to the computer, to Windows, to Linux, to Android. So since the equipment I showed previously is pretty heavy, SDR transmitter can be connected to any computer, just set up the antenna and use it anywhere. So there are different kinds of ways, of course. And the ultra short waves are used to communicate to the satellites. Let's talk about different kinds of antennas, which I have. Actually, on top, I have this antenna that gets the data from the meteorological satellites. So each antenna is for a specific range of frequencies. And the software that manages all this, it's either Arbitron, like in my case. There's stuff for Linux, for Mac, for any system there. What do they do? What does the software do? First of all, they calculate the trajectory of the spacecraft, how it would fly, when and where it will be. Also, the software calculates the frequency at which you should communicate to the device, because since each spacecraft is moving, there's a certain Doppler effect, like with the radars of the police. When the spacecraft approaches, the frequency increases. When the spacecraft goes farther, the frequency increases, and that kind of shift, it's important to calculate. All the meteorological satellites, they either have the polar orbit to cover the entire Earth, or geo-connected orbit, which is more targeted to a particular country. What is available right now for is 5 satellites. As far as I know, there's software for most of these satellites. We can get information on these kind of satellites. This is the Russian Meteor AM2 satellites. It's at the height of 800 kilometers now at the orbit, and it's with a definition of 1.51 pixel per kilometer. So it transmits everything via the radio waves, short radio waves, 137.1 megahertz, and this kind of images is possible to collect from this satellite. This legendary shot that went through around the internet, the shot of the eclipse that I got. On the top, we can see it. To get this shot, of course, I had to drive out, set up the antenna using the receiver and record the signal, and then I went home. Of course, I didn't know whether I will actually get the shot. I just recorded the radio signal and decoded it at home. Next, Electro L. This is the Russian satellite. Probably a lot of people are familiar with it. Probably not everybody, but yet. It works at the Earth's orbit. It's situated in one point and shoots the entire planet in high definition. American satellites NOAA 15, 18, and 19. They've been launched in 1998, 95, and 99. And they send the analog signal, so it's possible to get the signal from them if literally you just buy the radio, go to the market, buy the radio, any radio connected to the computer, set up the software, and you can easily get the information from these satellites. It's a bit more complex with Meteor, but with NOAA it's simpler. Shots from NOAA look about like this. It's about 20 to 10 kilometers per 1 pixel, so it's a low resolution, yet it's more informative. We have only 2 channels here, so visually it's the visual channel and the temperature channel. It also sends these satellites also send the infrared scope and scopes like that. Cloudy, rainy. This is the way it shoots the Earth. So if the satellite moves around the orbit of the Earth, it shoots the stripe of say 2,000 kilometers. It shots it, it processes it, and sends back to Earth. So the signals is being sent non-stop, 24/7. So you can get this kind of picture anytime. The decoder for American satellites, no, they are openly available. You have to pay for the software, but there's a free version of it, which can also manage the transceiver, correct the frequency, switch on and switch off the transmission. For our Russian meteors, we have this Russian decoder. Now let's speak about how, now we're getting closer to what is the part of the Earth station. Of course, the on-ground station should contain of several elements. First of all, the antenna. The more pieces you have in it, the better. It is attached to the turning device, so it can be constantly pointed in the direction of the satellite, since it's moving around the orbit non-stop, and antennas should be directed towards the satellite. Of course, PC is the central device. It manages both the receiver, the transceiver, and the antenna, and the amplifier of the signal. Everything is controlled by the computer, and information is sent on screen. Now, the online receivers are very popular. So if you don't have the antenna or the little transceiver license, there's the web. There are web SDR receivers. So you go to the web page and can easily listen to any frequency range when the satellite gets over you. You choose the frequency and can do your scientific research. There are the meteor frequencies. My one has different ranges. The range where the cosmonauts work, at which the cosmonauts work. And now we're preparing 12 megahertz, but there are no antennas yet. The English Cube satellite, it was launched in November 2013 during the eclipse. There were some very strange things happening to it. It was the source of experiments how the moon's shadow would affect the amount of light which its battery would get. So thanks to this, its transmitter, it was possible to build this kind of graph. So it's via the the statistics of the charging of the batteries. So it was visible when the satellites were getting through the shadow, the voltage was falling. So this is briefly. Of course, there are a lot of other things, but please answer your questions. I have a practical question. There was a story about fishing to see the weather. So, but in the real life, what a person can get from the data from the meteorological satellite on his own, compared to, say, the data that he would get from the news. Say, for example, would he be able to find out something that he would not see on Gizmodo or any other meteorological portal? So say, I will see that the hurricane is tomorrow and nobody knows about that yet. Yeah, you can get that kind of information. Well, if we talk about American satellites, there's 3 of them, and one satellite goes around the Earth 3 times in a day, 3 times in a night, so have overall 18. They go around the Earth 18 times, and they can build the animation of the crowds, and they can see the fronts for the storms. Or if we talk about burning forests, for example, here's the infrared spectrum or the The smoking is very visible on these satellites. Recently, a couple of years ago, in Dubai, the oil rigs were burning, and it was very evident on the shots from the satellite, although the president mentioned. So this is the way you can use the meteorological satellites. You said about the turning device that points the antenna to the satellite. The question is, can this be solved by installing the antenna with round polarity? Well, it depends on your objectives. I have this kind of antenna with round polarity, circular polarity. There are two frames there, 90 degrees with opposite phases, so this kind of antenna can receive the signal in a semisphere. And if you put them together and connect them to transmitter, yes, on low orbits, we can escape this kind of turning. However, there was the experiment when the Chinese sent their zone to fly around Moscow. There was a transmitter, a special kind there, and they put this kind of transmitter on everything right now, even to those devices that fly to the asteroids, so it's kind of a boom. So with this kind of antenna, it will not be possible to get the signal, and yet it has to be pointed to follow the spacecrafts. Yeah, if we talk about low orbits for meteorological satellites, you can use this kind of circular antennas, but this is really the amateur stuff. If you want to do something more serious, you need to get the turning antenna and point it at Moscow, at Venus, at Mars.
Question to Alexei. I may have missed something, but what about hacking the satellites? Are we about to hear anything about that? Any discussion? Okay, it's okay about receiving the signal, but what about transmitting something up there? And what is the code, etc.? Or maybe interfere into the control systems? You know, I can share you a myth with the Sputnik satellite. So the story goes like that. Because this solar eclipse is an event which attracts a lot of journalists and other people, I approached Roscosmos with one idea. Why don't you give a snapshot of this eclipse from space, you put it into news, and everyone will like what you do. Roscosmos got interested, they talked to their technical people, and the technical people said that it is impossible to get a photograph of solar eclipse. Maybe they were too lazy, but, you know, those were technical people telling the Roscosmos press people, told them. And then I saw information about one amateur who received the signal from the satellite, and he did something that Roscosmos people could not do, or claimed could not do. So it was a case of kind of hacking. Okay, it's okay when the satellite flies right above your head, but in this case the satellite was quite far away, but he was so good as a radio guy that the satellite was very close to the horizon, but he got the result. Of course it was not a full hack case, but he did something that the whole Roscosmos failed to do. Maybe they did not want to do it. And what about controlling satellites, hacking the control systems? Well, the satellites have each its own specific platform. It's not possible to hack it without this information. The only thing it is possible to do is to interfere into controls if you know the frequencies. Let's take a Russian Progress 27 rocket. The frequencies are known to everyone, and theoretically it's possible when the thing flies above you, you can modulate a signal which is stronger than the Roscosmos signal, and the spacecraft will not receive the signal, but not hacking it. Okay, can you assemble something from readily available parts? Yes, you can find something on the market. The amplifiers are not so good, but well, it's possible to build something that will make it unoperational. There were cases when Ukrainians were creating interference for geostationary satellites. So it's a case of suppressing the signal which goes from Earth to space, not vice versa. Of course, they can switch to another range immediately. Maybe Phobos ground station could also have been damaged like this. Yes, and a long time ago, when U.S. satellites were successfully flying up there and Russian satellites kept falling on Earth, there was one crazy idea to put a barrel of iron nails into space and have it explode there, so that all satellites will be damaged. Not that serious. There was a case when a US and Russian satellites collided. Another case was a stupid one when the Chinese launched an anti-satellite missile to hit their own satellite at the height of 700 kilometers. There are cases like this. But if we put a kind of satellite somewhere in the orbit and have it destroyed, all we do is we block this specific orbit. If you put a bunch of nails, a handful of nails in a low orbit, they will fall down quickly. But if it's 800 kilometers above the Earth, they will stay there for hundreds of years. But outer space is so big that even if you have a trainload of nails, you cannot block all the orbits. Okay, this is quite a positive note, and with that we can switch to the next presentation, Alexander Ilyin. My presentation is all about space. It's not about hacking. It's history and future of space flights. Let me start with history. You know, it is impossible to really understand the current situation in space research unless you go back to 1960s. And I'm trying to understand why people were so enthusiastic and launched such big projects. And then we'll go to future. Why did people want to go up to space? Why didn't they put their ambitions to doubt? You know, the only thing people knew about planets was anything they can view through telescope. In case of Venus, it's only the clouds that could be seen. Everything else you have to imagine. Mars was more interesting because they saw kind of channels there, or canals. This is what you see Mars, how you see Mars through the eye of a 19th century telescope and in a modern picture. So people back then had an idea that those canals were dug by Martians and maybe there were some remnants of a Martian civilization. So people did not even challenge this idea to go to Mars, because of course we wanted to meet Martians. Early in the 20th century, people get more and more euphoric about space travel. Some initial engineering ideas came about. Of course, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky was a pioneer of space traction and space research. And this is how he could imagine a spacecraft with gyroscopes which would be used for flight control. And it was quite predictive of what really happened. Next came 1927. The Civil War was not far ago. So there was another step when rockets started to be designed. But it was only the Nazi Germany that put this on an industrial scale. There were some enthusiasts in the Soviet Union, but at the nation level, it was only Germany that could do that. They allocated enormous funding for that purpose. I did some inflation-adjusted calculation. So for Peenemünde Center, the Nazi Germany spent an equivalent of $4 billion, enormous funds. And the result was immediate. The first ballistic missile was actually designed similar to what we have now, with very sophisticated control system, turbo engine, really the first big ballistic missile. In 1944, there were some vertical launchers, and the Pfau-2 rocket penetrated the space boundary, 90 kilometers. The Federal Republic of Germany tried to celebrate an anniversary in last year, but Great Britain protested. Von Braun, after the Second World War, ended up in the United States with all his team. A small part of the team came to the Soviet Union, but most of them emigrated to the United States. Von Braun was not really allowed to do any real work because Americans wanted those promising technologies to be developed by American specialists, not former Nazis. So to attract the public to the idea of public research, public travel, von Braun wrote a series of articles in the 1950s. They were very beautifully illustrated, and this is one of them. So von Braun showed that even using the Pfau-2 technology, people could go to space right then, or maybe 10 years from then. And the public response was very strong. People saw the pictures, they read the articles, and then they started asking, if it's so real, if it's so close, why are we not there yet? So there was a very great pressure from the public, and especially when people expected Martians to visit the Earth or us to visit them. It was about the time when most of the science fiction masterpieces were written in America, in the Soviet Union. Late in 1950s, Walt Disney invited von Braun to do some advertising cartoons about space. You can search for them on YouTube. Some of the things are very impressive in terms of predictions, how the spacecraft would land. It's very similar to a space shuttle. And it was time when television was on the rise in the United States, and the Disney cartoons were seen by many people, and people kept asking the president, view the television. It is possible to launch something into space. Why are not doing that yet? So there was very little knowledge about the closest planets like Mars and Venus. People expected that those could be habitable. So people were eager to go to space to meet the Martians, to put it short. And there was a Soviet-made movie, The Planet of Storms, that was about Venus. The U.S. directors made it into something else. But anyway, everyone understood why we need to go to Venus. The Soviet Union built the R-7 ballistic rocket. So then came successes of the Soviet Union. The first satellite, the first space flight to move, the first photograph of the other side of the moon. It was a shock for the world. Another story about the dark side of the moon. One French wine maker made a bet that people will never see the other side of the moon, and then he had to send 100 boxes of his wine to the Academy of Science of the Soviet Union. So 100 boxes of wine, and only one box of wine ended up in the team that actually designed the rocket. So this is how they celebrated the success. After this wave of success, there was some euphoria. People thought, well, we can do everything. So in the 1960s, not on paper, but at the level of government documents, a new interplanetary rocket was conceived, and a Martian mission was planned for early 1970s, and people thought it was quite realistic. Nobody was scared, and nobody was pessimistic. And probably this is one of the best designed projects of a Martian mission. Next came 1961, the first man in space. The United States thought it was a slap in the face. And then 1 month later, the President of America said, well, we are behind, but in some years we will put man to the moon, and then bring them back. And they did that. So I listed the Soviet priorities in the red, and then the American answers in blue. So the U.S. catched up. The triumph of von Braun, who really was involved, engaged in this work, despite his Nazi background. So he said that in terms of humanity, putting someone to the moon was as important as the evolutionary moment when life came on land from water. So people thought, well, we are now the first on the moon, and we will get any funding we ask for. But the public lost interest very quickly. When the first moon mission was successful, everyone was enthusiastic, everybody was watching the TV coverage. But Apollo 13 was not online. So the third time it was not so exciting anymore. Engineers were also euphoric in America, like they were in the Soviet Union. So there was a prediction back then that in the year 2000 there would be regular flights, piloted flights between Earth and Mercury, and people were given figures to prove that in year 2000 people would live and work in space and on other planets. But it all started with non-piloted missions or probes. It was less expensive and less risky for people's lives. So the Marina 4 in 1967 brought some initial Martian photographs. It was a disappointed. No canals, no Martians. It was a surface very similar to the moon, some kind of desert. In the Venera 6, the Soviet Venus station did not even reach the bottom. It was crashed by the air pressure and high temperature. No kind of life there. So the humanity found that there's no place to go really. So these immediate destinations all of a sudden disappeared, and with that disappeared the motivation. So initially the idea was that people would bring some wood panels and nails to Mars and start building houses similar to American towns. None of that happened. So there were three options put in before the President of the United States. So these there were very modest options. 100 people inhabiting a station on the moon, 2 Martian missions, and something else. And the funding that was requested was twice as big as anything else, any annual spending. So it was the war of Vietnam War. So Nixon actually turned all of them down. To compare, NASA has $17 billion. Roscosmos has only 5, and they were asking for 60 at that time. So this is the kind of evolution of space exploration expenditure. You know, the peak corresponds to the Apollo program. So people never again spent so much on space. There were some mistakes that the Soviet Union did. As a result, the Soviet global space program was also discontinued, and the orbital stations that effectively were responses to the U.S. Successful moon missions became almost the only thing that was done in space. This is the American Skylab station. It's almost forgotten now. It was gigantic even by modern measure, and the astronauts that have experience with Skylab pity the American astronauts who have to squeeze into the International Space Station. So astronauts or other spacemen never had such comfort before. They had personal toilet at each of them. But that station did not have an independent engine, and it was burnt into the atmosphere. The shuttle never reached it. The Soviet Union kept improving its space stations, and in the 1980s the Mir station, the best that the Soviet engineer could do it. It's a multimodal station. America focused on reusable shuttle. Unfortunately, it was turned out not to be as economical as expected. The plan was that shuttle would replace all one-time launchers carrying crews and the cargoes. Before the Challenger, the attempts were to make frequent launches, and the shuttle demonstrated that it is not possible. The Soviet Union copied the shuttle, calling it Buran. Yes, it was a different system, because Buran is kind of multi-use, reusable shell on the rocket. But Buran was scrapped because the Soviet Union discontinued, ceased to be as a country. So, in fact, what you see in the Gorky Park is not the real Buran. It's a replica that was made for testing. The real thing was at Baikonur launching pad. It was in a hangar, and at one point the roof collapsed on that, and it's still there under the collapsed roof. The International Space Station was the result of a compromise and the result of shortage of funding. The US had its Freedom project. In Russia, almost nothing in the 1990s, but the United States sponsored the Russian space projects. So the result was the Mir shuttle project. That Mir 2 merged with the American Freedom project, so the result was the International Space Station. And because of those compromises and semi-optimal solutions on both sides, many things are not optimal, like solar batteries, which were designed for different angle of the orbit, and then they don't work really well for the Baikonur launchers. In the 1990s, as electronics technologies were evolving, that was the period of golden age of interplanetary probes, and the great idea was that people did not really need to go there that far. So the messenger took these years to get from Mercury to Pluto, and it returned a lot of photographs. So people start to say, why do we need to spend money to put people into space? But in fact, probes can only, like skimming milk, you get only the most obvious information, but anything else remains unknown, like concentration of ice 2 meters below the surface of Mars, because automatic probes cannot do that, cannot go that deep. And there's very little data, actually. We can say the same about other planets, like Saturn. Cassini is operating on the Saturn orbit. They have cameras which are focused on some pinpoint objects from, and this is done by sending a signal from Earth. And it is actually amateur astronomers who send that signal instructing the camera where to focus. In the beginning of this century, George Bush initiated the Constellation program, and the internet is full of pictures from that time. But Obama closed down that program. Why? Actually, the idea was to use the shuttle technology to start missions to the moon. Why did Obama decide not to do that? He said, no, it's not interesting. We've been on the moon already. Why don't you do something new and something more exciting, and then we will give you money. And so it was. The program was very logical and reasonable. Why don't we capitalize on the moon experience to go to Mars? But it was closed. About the same time, Russia did some financing, some funding. Roscosmos received as little as the Indian Space Agency back in 1990s, but then some funding came about, and they designed Clipper, what is called Clipper, but the Clipper project was again discontinued as too expensive, too complicated. The winged craft was found to be too expensive, and it was not clear what it would be used for. And despite the fact that it was shown at Maxi, and there were great expectations, but it was closed down. After Constellation was discontinued, Obama came up with the idea of the flexible path, and it was so flexible, the Americans themselves do not know where it will lead them. Maybe to Mars, but because no more missions will be made to the moon, they came up with strange missions, like a spacecraft that will capture a small asteroid and bring it to the moon orbit, and then a piloted spacecraft spacecraft will go there, approaching that asteroid. So NASA specialists keep coming up with new ideas, such as forget about asteroids, and why don't you send a piloted mission to the Martian orbit and to the Moon orbit. When they look into that, they find that it is much more expensive than NASA can afford, and then they go back to the asteroid idea. Still, they keep building extra heavy rockets, and they're working on Orion. If it goes as planned, such a big rocket will go into space in 1918. This is how they view the Martian mission. There are many options, and nobody knows which of them will be chosen. From the ballistical point of view, it can be theoretically done by 1937 or 1940, but this is very hypothetical. One option is to use chemical engine for startup, for launch, and then use solar panels when the spacecraft is used as a towboat. Private companies give some hope. Elon Musk is someone who's well known for building rockets, but if we look at the figures, you will see that out of all the funds that Musk got, $160 million were only used for rocket design, but NASA invested more than $1 billion in Musk. And people say that this is one of the best projects. So we can say that we cannot say that this is a very honest person. Yes, he's a good businessman. He gave NASA what it wanted. He got a government contract, but he uses public money. Orbital systems could be used, but after a recent crash of this suborbital spacecraft, there are some doubts now about the future of space tourism. Another area of business that is developing now is microsatellites. 100 kilogram capacity craft can now do something that gigantic aircraft did before. This can be used to quickly get some data, return the data to Earth, and that can be used for commercial purposes. But this is purely private space to space travel. As America as a whole, NASA is very conscious of this dependency on the International Space Station and the Russian technology. So NASA funded 2 private spacecraft. The Boeing got all 2 billion, and Dragon of Aeromasco 2.5 billion. The Dream Chaser is another interesting thing that was using the aerodynamics of the Soviet-made Bor. The Americans photographed how Bor was recovered from the Indian Ocean, and the aerodynamics was really good, was found to be good, and they added a capsule. There was a replica that was not used, and it was also put to tender, but it lost. So Boeing and Elon Musk were the 2 winners. And here is a picture of another model from Russia. So after the International Space Station exhausts its service life, NASA will probably announce a bid for a low orbital station, and it's very probable that that station would be private. Another example of private space travel, the so-called Mars One project. Sergei Krikalev was very pessimistic. The Russian spaceman was very pessimistic about it. I asked the engineers of that project some financial questions. I did not need precise answers, but I wanted to be sure that they're really thinking about it and that it is well developed.
However, he responded to all my questions with one word: the engineers will work. I'm just a manager. I don't care about it. That's what he said. His involved. That was his level of involvement. Yet they collected some funds from the crowd, from 5,000 people, $20 per person, and that's where they shut down the project. That was the end of it. They had some ads from different places, but it's more of a scum, you know. More private projects led to Mars. The Dennis Tito project, that's the millionaire and the first space tourist. The flying around Mars without landing. It takes 4 days to fly around Mars, and then they go back to Earth. The question is, why would you do that? It's an open question. Yet it was an interesting interplanetary mission. Dennis Tito estimated this in $4 billion. However, Dennis Tito is not a billionaire, he's just a millionaire, so he would not be able to finance this kind of venture on his own. That's why he asked the different investment funds to the state, but nobody was interested in this kind of fly. But media, however, dedicate a lot of time not to the construction of this kind of craft, not the radiation equipment, but the fact that this kind of a crew of 2 people should be family and how they would survive for such a long time together. The next project is the Martian Society project, the Mars Direct. This is a risky expedition to Mars with the use of local resources, getting where the fuel will be got from the Mars atmosphere. Thanks to this kind of approach, it's possible to make a cheap Mars exhibition, which would cost $15 to $30 million, and it's relatively cheap. Another single space agency is planning to do this kind of thing. Yes, the founder of the Mars Society, Mark Zubrin, is a huge enthusiast. He has been rooting for Mars Direct for a long time. He's built 2 pilot bases imitating the Mars base, one in Utah Desert. I was there, worked there for 2 years ago. It's quite a weak imitation. There's founders which are very simple. So what Zubrin was able to produce using the money of the sponsor. Russian plans, of course, are changing non-stop. Our federal space program was suggested last year, and based on this kind of patriotic euphoria, it was a beautiful program before bad things happened to Russian rubble. So far this program has been significantly cut, but a month ago it was represented again to the government. It's a 10 years program till 2026. So apart from the interplanetary travel, there are 3 moon stations, only 3 moon stations, automatic stations. And the manager of the company that will be building the stations says that Russia must firstly learn to land the moon. So Soviet Union was able to land the moon in 1966, and Russia still needs to learn that kind of stuff. That's why the first craft, Moon 25, is needed to learn to land the moon. Next, there will be more and more interesting loads. So, landing to the southern polar areas, to the craters or regolith, where there might be water ice there. Martian plans are mainly related to Europe. After the crash of the Phobos, our scientists asked for help from Europe. Europe was kind of having issues with their ExoMars, probably because NASA didn't allow them to work their rockets. Russia allowed it. So there will be 2 launches in 16 and 17, the orbital spacecraft and the the fetching of the European Mars craft with Russian rockets. I don't know if it's good or bad for Europe, because the only good landing to Mars by the Soviet tools is Mars 3, and it was not entirely successful. So Russia doesn't have the expertise in this kind of area. So it's a hugely expensive Mars craft. So I'm a bit scared for the European colleagues. I'm a bit aware of their problems. To Russian Mars crafts, also the part of the Russian programs. Very interested in missions if they will be actually put into the reality. The point is that the detectors for these crafts were supposed to be bought in England before the sanctions. Now the English don't want to sell it to Russians, so that's why the project has been postponed. There was another project called Millimetron that would allow to look into the deep craters and see the to the wormholes, the black stars, and see the parallel universes. But this project was postponed. It was suspending as too expensive up to the 2025. Now there's interspectrometer operating at the orbit. This is a unique device. Russia is very proud of it, and that's justified. Russian scientists, international scientists, are in line to work with that device. Russian plans for piloted spacecrafts is the replacement of Soyuz with the new spacecraft called PTK, and it was called Russia initially. Now it's called PTK something. Perhaps they will come up with a new, better name. Also, there's the intention to increase the Russian segment of the International Space Station, but it's the same as with peace stations. We built it and then we drowned it. So it would be sad to do the same thing with the Russian segment of the International Space Station. So that's why there's a plan by 2024, when the International Space Station will have to be stopped. There's an intention to unhook the Russian part of it and make it a separate station. They even invite the Chinese to take part in the project. However, the Chinese have their own program, so they're not very much interested in this kind of thing. Recently we had this Angara rocket flying into space. It was on TV. There was huge hype, but Yeltsin signed the directive to launch it in 1992. They finally built it, but to protect the constructors, the financial support was so very much limited. So as soon as they got the money in the middle of the previous decade, that's when they started to build it. So it took them about 10 years, and that's pretty much okay. So what else happened with Russian plans before the funds were cut? This was a very interesting project called the nuclear tug, when the space nuclear station would power the object. This is something, by the way, that Russia could really offer to the international partners. But in the new federal program, there are only the developments of this technology, but the tug itself is out. I truly hope that the government will notice that and bring back the tug into the federal space program, because unfortunately now nobody wants to do it. It's a very complex thing with the element base, and there are no enterprises who want to do this. So now everyone gladly closes it, but I wouldn't love that to happen. In Russia, there was also a plan to build a super heavy rocket similar to the American one, which was supposed to support our moon program. But since the budgets were cut, the heavy carrier is postponed to 2025. There are only paperworks on it. And as a result, the entire Russian program is going to be based on Angara. For that, Angara is going to be forced. The third step is going to be based on hydrogen. Now Angara is able to bring 24 tons to the orbit. After the boost is going to be carrying 35 to 37 tons. The moon expeditions on this kind of ship, on the new ship at the KNP, turn into a real circus. So you need to launch it 4 times. The craft, then the launching block, the moon, a landing model, another 2 launches. then they connect at the orbit, then they fly towards the moon, then they connect there, the landing module and the ship. So there are lots of connections and a lot of rockets, 4 rockets.
далеко за пределами ФКП, соответственно, где-то на 30-й год. Ну, тут тоже резонный вопрос возникает.
So a lot of mating. So again, it's all postponed to 2030. So the question is, why would you do that up to 2030 with a scheme that was realized in 1960s? The answer is that the intention is to organize the automated bases at the moon poles, and once every 6 months there will be hours cosmonauts flying there to fix the techniques, of which of course will probably break. So the spacemen fly there, they install something new, and they go back. So this is not a permanent base, but a short-term visit to avoid any radiation problems. But that's far ahead in 1930s. So that's how the moon base is being drawn here. This is 2040, 2045, kind of modest to build this kind of thing. 4 barrels and 6 men in 2045 on the moon. That's really far from the fiction of the 60s and the science fiction of the 60s. I didn't like that at all. This is my suggestion. I suggested that when the Super Heavy rocket was suggested, I suggested to bring this compact base modules with the help of Angara to the moon. We calculated with a small team the system of life support, energy support of the base, the connection, the protection from radiation, the deployment of the base, the transportation system. We built this kind of sketch, the project, and I'm happy to say that as a result of our activities, the Federal Space Program was really updated with the forced Angara and a not super heavy rocket. However, we suggested to use the Soyuz ship to the moon, but not the new Petka MP, the heavy ship. So this did not get into the Federal Space Program, but we're still fighting for it. In the end of our struggle, there was a team. There appeared to be a team, a small team. And together with that team, we went through Skolkovo. Of course, Skolkovo, everybody's skeptical about Skolkovo, but still it's a nice innovation center which helps startups. Yes, they are fond of bureaucracy there, but if you feel it all in correctly, they will help. So with a small team, we went to Skolkovo, to the space cluster, with the project of a superlight spacecraft. And the satellites now are becoming smaller and smaller, and 100 kilos device can solve some serious tasks. So with this kind of devices, we are building rockets, a kind of a turnkey launch, because now for the space businessmen who build small satellites, they need to wait a lot of ongoing launches. There are lots of limitations to these kind of launches. That's why we suggest to take away these kind of limitations and make this turnkey rocket. There are a lot of problems like falling on the parts of the rocket, the creation of our custom light engine. Yet we got the investments. By 1917, we're going to make a first launch. Let's come back to the plans of different states. The plans of the Chinese are often mentioned in the media, and there's an opinion that Chinese are going to build their own moon base right now. Well, the Chinese have their open plans. They're openly available. They're all in Chinese, though. So by 2022, they are going to build the Chinese space station, the copy of the Mir station, the multi-module station. It's all signed. There's the financial support. They're not going to do any moon stuff, any piloted moon stuff particularly. However, on Earth, they have the entire complex to test the life support system, and it's called the Moon Palace, and there's a reason for that. It's not a Martian palace. It's a moon palace, kind of the hint of the future moon base, but in a far future. Why this complex is interesting? The point is that the Chinese got the closed life support system there, which weighs 98% of the mass, so 89% comes back and being eaten. However, the cosmonauts had to eat worms to bring back the albumin. So anyway, our scientists consider that kind of thing a death. Yet the Chinese in their blog wrote that it was very hard. He wanted to interrupt the experiment, but since the government and the Chinese party said do it, he finished the experiment. They're also going to send a lot of probes. It's like a Strugatsky book, so building the ground from Serera, from this dwarf planet, the exhibition to the satellites of the Jupiter. The Chinese plans are good because there is a real punishment for not putting those plans into reality. So probably the huge part of those probes will actually make their way into space. This Chinese plan for about the moon base, we have these pictures, but of course these are child's play. Perhaps after 2030, the Chinese will be interested in the moon. The Indian plans. Surprisingly, India is a huge space state. They have certain equipment. They have probes at the orbit of Mars, which works right now, and they brought it there from the first attempt. Russia doesn't have this kind of opinion. Only the Soviet Union had. They're going to do piloted flight. They're going to do manned spacecrafts. They're competing with the Chinese. They're going to launch a few probes. Probably Indian probes will be on the moon at the polar area earlier than before the Russian one. So, because the Indians are planning to launch it in 2017, Russians into 2019. The far future plans, why would you need the moon at all? Before answering the question, why would we need the moon at all? It's important to answer the question, are people going to get into space at all? And if the answer is no, then why would you need the moon? If the answer is yes, then moon is needed as a resource base for further launches into space, because there's no atmosphere on the moon. The gravity is weak. That is why it is easier to launch something from the moon and bring the loads to the orbit of Earth. And it's cheaper to bring loads from moon to the orbit of Earth. But for that, it's necessary to have the launching platforms and some kind of industries on the moon. It would be possible to bring the equatorial solar panels on the moon to send the energy to Earth via microwaves. So anyway, there are different options, different solutions. Moon can be a step from which it will be possible to continue venturing to space. There's this childish book by Pavel Plushantsev called Station Moon, and it's described in many details why would we need the moon. And I would suggest to everybody interested in the management of space programs, and why would you need the moon? Again, why would we need Mars? Do we need a colony on Mars right now? My opinion is that probably not, because Mars is interesting as the kind of a additional planet after terraforming, when we could turn it into the Earth and then populate it. Not necessarily the oxygen atmosphere, just increase the pressure so it would be possible to be there with the oxygen mask. So that will make the work there more simple. Then selling the territories, make it commercial. There's this science fiction book called Applied Terraforming. It described the business models of Mars, very simply. Of adaptation of Mars. So this is kind of a long-term objective for the humanity. In addition, some people say that there are no objectives apart from Moon and Mars and in space. It's not. Venus, for example, it's hard to land the surface, but the atmosphere stations could be built there. Why would we need the atmosphere stations there? Because in the atmosphere of Venus, there's a zone where the temperature is comfortable, 20 degrees, and the pressure is 1 atmosphere. So this is the place where it would be easily to build kind of flying city like this. But if somebody thinks that NASA suggested this kind of new project, it's not new. Here's the picture from the Soviet magazine from the 70s with the flying city in the Venus orbit. This is a dwarf planet, a former asteroid of the main range. Now it's a rare dwarf planet. Recently, the Dawn probe flew there and made a few a few shots there, and there's some kind of light points there. Probably it's the water ice. Cerera is farther than Mars. It's a major asteroid field. It's a small planet. It's easier to land there than the moon, and it's easier to fly off it. So it's kind of a supply station on the way to far-off planets. In addition, if there's water ice there, water ice meaning water, oxygen, hydrogen. This is the fuel for spacecraft. This is a far future, but the Chinese have their reasons to put this kind of stuff in their space program, to build the ground to build the samples of the soil from Cerera. The samples of soil from Cerera. Again, the far-off planets. There are some planets which, according to the analysis, have some oceans. Perhaps there is life there, some underwater oceans. Yet at the surface of Europa planet, Europe is situated, unfortunately, in some radiation fields of Jupiter. So the radiation there is huge. The person in scaphandra would get the lethal dose in 45 minutes. Yeah, so it would be possible to land there to the far-off satellites of Jupiter, which are away from the radiational fields, and send robots to Europa. NASA, however, developed a few projects here. They have the departments which are in charge of these kind of projects of future, and it's interesting. You can see the report, PDF, a few interesting offers, and the Saturn expeditions. Saturn doesn't have such a huge radiation, so Titan is an interesting satellite, the only body in the solar system apart from Earth that has hydrosphere on the surface, not only under the icy mantle, but on the surface. So there are seas, there are rivers, there are rains, but it's not of water, but of liquid carbohydrates. Water there, and the ice there is so frozen, it's like rock there. It's there's pebble in rivers made of water ice. So it's an interesting body. It has a very dense atmosphere. It can be used to boost the engines, and you can imagine the gas from tankers which are landing in those seas, getting the carbohydrates, boosting the atmosphere, and through the solar system on the base to build the carbohydrates to different bases. So it's hard to get the businesses interested to this kind of project, but because, you know, the return on investment is about 500 years, so businessmen would need to live much longer to get interested into these kind of projects. But of course, it's not correct to say that there's nothing in the solar systems. There are miracles there, and there's something to look at. Of course, exoplanets, the planets by the other stars. When I was reading in my childhood books about this, I was thinking that people will never ever find out what there are planets by the other stars, or these kind of planets do not exist at all. So in the 90s, there were a few discoveries in this area, and in the entire 21st century, probably the amount of open exoplanets is over 1,000. So a lot of planets have been discovered, planets like Earth, where life is possible. So probably in the galaxy there are three planets per 3 planets per each habitant of the Earth. So there are a lot of objectives for space travel, but the British Interplanetary Society wanted to calculate how to make the Starcraft, the Daedalus project. They approached it quite seriously. They calculated everything, and it turns out that the spacecraft that will fly with the 1/10 of the light speed flying to Star Bernard for 66 light years. It would fly for 60 years, and then through the system of that star it would go through in 1 week because it doesn't have any fuel to slow down. So it would collect the information. So the mass of this kind of spacecraft created with the current and future technologies would be 54,000 tons. So to compare it, Proton will be able to put 22 tons to the orbit, and through the entire history of space travel, the humanity brought into space loads weighing about 20,000 tons. So turns out that this kind of spacecraft, this interstellar craft, would weigh twice as much as the entire load that the humanity sent to space throughout its history. So it's impossible to bring this kind of construction from Russia. So it should be built based on the resources of Moon or other asteroids. Again, why would we need this kind of interstellar craft, which would fly for 60 years, fly to the place for 1 week, and it would not even be able to transmit the data, perhaps. So it would be more productive to build a huge telescope in space and just look whether there are planets out there or not. So interstellar crafts, this is more of a kind of a mind's play now. Recently we got the information about the experiments for the so-called warp engine. If previously people were talking that it's impossible to build a warp engine, now they said that for the work of such engine you would need the energy comparable to the mass of the Jupiter problem, so you would need to burn the Jupiter to launch this kind of engine. Now people say that a small nuclear reactor would be enough for this kind of craft. So probably this is the hope for a certain breakthrough and something new in the space flights, the new age of space travel. Well, overall, this is the conclusion of my presentation with this joyous idea that we do have hope. We have we have some time for questions. I'm sorry, I cannot hear the presenter, that's why I would not be able to translate it. So, for example, flying to Mercury and get boosted with the solar sail, this is not the modern level of space travel. Of course, the enthusiasts support the idea of solar sail, and the Japanese are interested in that kind of idea. They're even sending the probe to the Jupiter system. They're going to make the probe to the Jupiter system based on the solar sail, but this is their fantasy. It's not doesn't have any financial support. Of course, the idea of solar sail, it's an operating idea. It can be working, but we need different kind of equipment, and again. It would be possible to blow the solar sail with lasers. For example, they would be the lasers on the moon blowing into the sail of the spacecraft. So now solar sail is not used for any transportation. Will not be used in the near future. That project, yeah, there were these kind of projects in the USA. We had this MAX project in Russia. That was a very interesting three-component rocket engine, but this project is mostly interested to the military because it allows making the interception at the first round, first turn. this kind of project is not interesting to space travels because the plane could never be replaced, never replace the first stage. It's kind of a zero stage with a crew which needs to be saved if something goes wrong. Besides, the benefit from the plane is very low, especially if it's not a hypersonic plane. So this kind of system can be used for any azimuth.
Or to remove the dropping fields. From the commercial point of view, if business were interested and provided an ability to reduce the load, the weight, it could be more economical, less expensive. You know, when a student, I did some calculation to see whether it is really so promising, and I found it is not. From the economic point of view, we cannot abandon rockets for aircraft. This is my view. Unfortunately, the Apollo program was a lot of image making. They were eager to get better of the Soviet Union, and anything else regarding the moon was a continuation of the Apollo campaign. So it was supposed to start after 1973. They were thinking about building bases on the moon, living in tents, but that was cancelled because politically the program really worked. The Soviet Union was left behind, and it didn't make sense to put any more money into that. So from the scientific point of view, Apollo did not do much. They brought some moon rock, but there was one geologist, only one geologist out of all the crew. Mostly they were military pilots, and not much of moon research was made. They could have moved ahead and done more, and though technologically everything was ready, but Nixon was not enthusiastic about those plans. Unfortunately, they were cancelled. It was not. It was a project of a nuclear engine, Nerva, in the United States. There was some in Russian projects as well. The United States gave it more size. They even tested it with liquid. Nitrogen. And the engine itself was found to be very emissive of radiation, and there were many other problems, and the benefit was not obvious because chemical engines were good enough at that point, and both in the States and in this country the projects were frozen. I talked with old generation specialists who were involved in the projects back in the Soviet times, and I asked how many years would you need to make this engine workable, and they said it would have taken 10 years with unlimited funding. Sorry, I cannot hear the question. It's easier with the Venus. It's closer to the sun because more energy comes from the sun and it could be used potentially. But Venus is overheated. Even if you build a screen from asteroids to screen from solar light, it would take 10,000 years for it to cool. So it's not clear how to remove the heat. And as for Mars, the big question is whether humans can survive long under the Martian gravity, which is much below the Earth gravity. So in this respect, Mars is not so promising, and it's much colder, farther from the sun. So, but there are projects with Venus, but it's very, very difficult. I tried to compare in terms of costs, what would be cheaper from the energy point of view. I compared this planetary project with the star flight, and I found it, from the energy point of view, it's equally difficult. As for the atmosphere, the problem of Mars is not only gravitation, it's also the absence of magnetic field. So solar wind removes any atmosphere. But the models show that it will take thousands of years, not immediately. So even if we create atmosphere there, it will have to be replenished, but not momentarily. But the magnetic field absence is the big problem. Interplanetary probes like Rassvet, who's at Cerera now, they use electric rockets with ionic technology. They use much less fuel and accelerate to higher speeds, but they are much less powerful. Acceleration takes a lot of time, and they need a lot of energy. There are big solar batteries and even reactors. So there's ionic engines in different modifications will be used with a high probability. As for nuclear engines as such, with the reactors in place, I don't think they will be used because radiation phobia is too high. Everyone is afraid of putting a reactor there. But the Soviet Union contemplated putting one on an aircraft. Okay, this session was long, but it came to an end. You can keep asking your questions to the presenters privately. Vitaly Yegorov can tell you a lot about opportunities to do research through internet, and Mars is one possibility. Dmitry Mashkov told you about satellites. He told you a lot, but maybe some details are left out. And Alexander Ilyin, who knows all about rockets and the space exploration. So this is the end of the session, and the next one will come immediately after that, in the same room.